thank you so much, everybody, for joining this evening. Thank you so much for still supporting this platform. It's so dear to my heart, so I really want this to keep on going. And every month, some of you are newer to it, some of you are regulars. We have a guest speaker, and I'm so delighted to have Ruth back in my kitchen, Ruth Levin-Vorster. She was here. Ruth, I think you were one of the first guests in 2020, and her talk was so amazing. Back then I wasn't, not that I'm technically versed now, but I didn't have a proper camera and I couldn't record it, and I just loved her talk. She's grown, she's evolved in her studies, in her teaching, in her courses, and so she's going to be sharing a lot more gems this time around. So I feel very blessed to have you back. Ruth's going to be speaking about the role of self-awareness in healing relationships with yourself and with others. She's going to elaborate on that. I think it is so relevant, not just because of the recent past 3 years that we've all gone through. It's a topic that as humans we have to navigate and try and master all the time. So Ruth, thank you for joining us this evening, and welcome to my kitchen. Oh, unmute yourself. Sorry, you on mute still.
Lovely, Elaine. Lovely to be here. And hello, everybody. We're a lovely, intimate group, so we can have some really rich conversation, I hope. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about relationships, and in particular, the role of self-awareness in improving the challenging spaces of relationships and in enabling more authentic and healthy relationships with those that are important to us, because it tends to be our significant others, our spouses, our family members, our parents, our children, and then our close work colleagues or work colleagues we're having to navigate, that trigger the reactivity in us. And we all know that relationships can bring us unbelievable joy and unbelievable distress. And there's a really real reason for that, because they are a key messaging system to keep us in balance. They're a key messaging system for something we call homeostasis. And homeostasis is all the different parts of the brain-body system working in every moment of the day and of the night to keep you in balance so that you can flourish. And our relationships are a really key messaging system for that. So it's really a neurobiological thing that relationships are so important to us. And I'm going to talk to you particularly around reactivity, around emotional triggers. So what I do is I facilitate an understanding of your emotional triggers in personal, family, professional relationships, and then I teach tools to manage those emotions, bring them into balance with compassion. So I'm going to talk to you about a program that I run and a framework that I work within, which has been the subject of my PhD since 2018, and PhDs take long, and also is the framework that I work with in my practice. So I'm going to take you through what I do with people, and then I'm going to give you some of the outcomes that we found and that I have emerged in my PhD and also in my practice work. And then I'm going to teach you an exercise, a regulation tool, a lovely regulation tool. And then I'm going to open the floor for questions or conversation, really conversation. And if at any time you're a really intimate group, if at any time you want to ask something or interrupt, please do. We're in a kitchen, so we can be informal. So I take people through a program when I run it as groups, it's a 6-week program. And when I run it individually, it depends on the client, but it's usually between 9 and 12 sessions. And it's a very, very deep dive into you, into understanding your reactivity, how it shows up and where it shows up, how it was formed, and then teaching you how to manage it. So I'm going to take you through the 6 weeks that I do with people, so that you can get a really visceral, sort of tangible idea of what it is I do. So in week 1, so the program is called a theatre-based relational health intervention. The theatre-based is not, you don't do any acting, but my background was initially as a theatre director for 15 years before I moved into facilitation in the corporate and public sector. And then I started to develop self-awareness and empathy. So I adapted character development processes. And then I began to upskill in interpersonal neurobiology, positive psychology. I became an accredited mediator, did mindfulness. And then I developed this framework. And this, hi there, welcome. This framework is called a theatre-based relational health intervention. The theorists that underpin it come from both theatre practice and from biological psychology and social neuroscience. So in week 1, I do a talk on why relationships are so challenging for everybody. And I talk to the science behind that. I talk to the neuroscience behind that and the neurobiology behind that. And then I teach a fundamental tool of the program, a core tool that we practice together every week. It's called the Golden Nugget listening breathing exercise. And this is a particular exercise that works with breath placement and color visualization. And it teaches you to listen into your nervous system in any given moment to see how it's feeling. So you really learn to listen to your inside of your body. It then teaches you how to breathe in a very particular way so that you can activate the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the branch of the nervous system that encourages social engagement, social bonding, approach behaviors versus behaviors that take us into fight, flight, or freeze. That's week 1. In week 2, we start the really deep dive into self-awareness. And I think that what I've come to see in the last few years is that this is the most profound process and that everything spills out from here. It's a process where we look at different parts and often juxtaposing, contradicting parts of self. Parts we like, parts we don't like, parts we don't understand. And it's a visual, tactile exercise. So I get you to make characters with fabric and glue for 6 different parts of yourself. You name those characters, you look at the context and dynamics that overwhelm those characters, and you look at self-care activities that nourish each character back into balance. So what happens is you're working with 6 different parts of self, you externalizing them into character. You're able to see them outside of themselves, and you're able to see an array of parts of you, good parts and not so good parts. And it becomes less overwhelming. You also start to understand the information. These different parts of self give us information around what is overwhelming us, why it's overwhelming, what these different parts are doing for us. And it's a really profound insight into understanding yourself and into being able to start to look at those different parts so that they can stop being so fragmented and move into a cohesive whole. And I'm going to talk a lot more, when I get through this, around the results that we found over this and all the things that stem out of doing this particular process. But that's the process in week 2. And then we practice the Golden Nugget together. It's the Golden Nugget listening breathing exercise. And from now on, I'll refer to it as the Golden Nugget. In week 3, we do an embodied felt exercise where you go into 3 early caregiver dynamics, and you feel or observe how those dynamics show up in your body in terms of sensation, in your emotions, and in your mind in terms of thought and thinking patterns. So it's a really felt dynamic of each early caregiver. And then we look at how those caregivers, and I do 3 because often the third one is a surprise, and we look at how those patterns have been patterned into your nervous system and are playing out in your current relationships. Because what we do is we are all our early experiences, our early patterning is fueling how we look out on the world, our perspective lens on the world, how we go into relationships, how we look, how we listen, and how we receive. So the process of becoming conscious of it enables us to go, hang on a second, that belongs there. That's not serving me. We learn to become present through the golden nugget, and we learn to shift our reactivity, our reaction. We learn to choose our reaction. I also, at the end of this week, we practice the golden nugget. I send something out to everybody, and I do this both in groups and individually. So it's something you do at home called the biography worksheet. And the biography worksheet probes your early sensory, family, religious, political, social, and economic and cultural background, early environment. And what this does is it unearths what has formed your perspective lens, what has formed the lens that you gaze out at the world. And it's really exquisite to do this particular process in groups, because people get to witness how different lenses are and how it's impacting one's listening and receiving. In week 4, we do a real world imagined stressful conversation. So you have a stressful conversation, a real conversation from your life, but it's imagined. It happens in your mind's eye. You have the conversation, then you do the golden nugget, then you continue the conversation. And through this, you see how when you are threatened, what happens, or when you're feeling unsafe, what happens to your listening and also to your talking. And when you're feeling safe, what happens to your listening and what happens to your ability to talk firmly, but with kindness, and indeed to listen to the other side. Very powerful, embodied experience. And from that, we pull out your core trigger. When I say your core trigger, we're all walking around with one core trigger. We'll have more, but there'll be one that's fueling unconsciously our behavior in relationships. So it could be, I'm stupid, I'm invisible, I'm not respected, I'm not valued, I'm not seen, there's something wrong with me. I'm a failure. They're very universal across the board, from 19 years old to 60 years old. This is my range of clientele, and we all have them. We practice the golden nugget. In week 5, which is the penultimate week, we role play with that trigger, being triggered. So you bring a real world situation, you choose somebody to role play with. I instruct you what to do. You tell them, you'll tell them their vocal tone, and I'll talk about vocal tone and what is happening in the brain and the body. But we talk about, you tell them vocal tone, you tell them gesture, you tell them eye movement, eye gaze, head movement, and then you role play being triggered and interrupting your trigger with the golden nugget, so that you can stay regulated, you can stay in balance, and you can have a difficult conversation, but authentically, and move through it and keep the relationship. That's the aim, to keep our relationships going, but to become more authentic within them. In week 6, we practice the golden nugget. In week 6, it's really a wrap-up. We look at the whole process we've been through and the discoveries, and we refine. And if there's anything that people need to bring, they bring. We map forward how we're going to keep certain processes going. So the processes that are going that I haven't mentioned is from week 2, when you do the character analysis 1 exercise, you start to do a self-care activity every week. But the self-care activities are really particular to what, and they change weekly. You learn to listen in to what part of self is dominantly needing what in the week. And you start to do self-care with intention. It has a very profound effect on nourishing the nervous system and keeping you in balance, and down-regulating the parts of self that are adverse, that are not so nice. You do that every week. In addition, you practice the golden nugget for 1 to 4 minutes daily. And I encourage you through the process to find a moment in your routine that works for you. So for some people, it's first thing in the morning. For some people, it's their first coffee break. For some people, it's at lunch. You know, everybody finds a different hook into, it's got to be easy and able to integrate into your routine. Some people, they do it in the car. I can say that again. They do it in the car before they step out to work. I ran my pilot study when people were still driving. In my main study, we had to do all online. So it was a really interesting, and the results were all the same. So that's the program. In my private practice, actually, I've only been working with individuals. I'm hoping to start running some groups again, because the shared common humanity is something stunning. But really, I've had individuals wanting to go through the process. And then it's a much deeper dive, of course, because there's time and because it's just you and me. So I want to talk a little bit about, would you be interested in hearing a little bit about the theory that underpins it, or would that be boring and I'd rather go into case histories?
I'd like a little bit of the theory.
Okay, great. So
Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Mila.
Just to talk to the theorists that underpin the program. So they're 2 theatre practitioners, both who work in relational frameworks. The one is Ruth Levin, and he works with an embodied framework. Well, he did. He developed an embodied framework in the 1930s, both in the 1930s. And he developed a framework for movement, actually for dancers, which was then developed for actors, which is a very deep listening into the inner milieu, the inner life, to understand the relationship between an inner motivation and how it meets external space and turns into gesture. So if I explain it a little bit better, you have an impulse inside you, and it interacts with the other bodies in space. That's the other inner lives in space, the motivations that are going on inside them, as well as physical space with its physical delimiters and with its resonance. And that produces movement. So it becomes a very detailed attunement to how people express or hide certain things through the way they move in space. That's one of the things underpinning. The other is Konstantin Stanislavski, who developed a psychological model of developing character. And for him, you would look at the objective in every scene. So if we take a script, a play, in every scene, in every conversation that we're having, there's something we want from another person. That's the objective. But then there's the super objective, which I've translated into the core trigger. And the super objective is what you want in life. So you want approval, or you want, and it's an unconscious thing. And emotions, for Stanislavski, are the consequence of a thought or a set of thoughts that lead to the emotion. Then there's, this is translated in biological psychology and in social neuroscience through various practitioners. The first one is Stephen Porges, who developed polyvagal theory. And this is the evolution of the nervous system for social engagement. So we used to only have 2 branches of the nervous system. We had the sympathetic, innovative, energizing, the fight, flight, and we had the parasympathetic, but only the immobilization branch the freeze. And as our social systems became more complex, our brains developed, and the vagus nerve developed a new little branch that went ventrally, the nucleus ambiguous, and that promotes social engagement. It promotes approach behaviors. It promotes interpersonal connection. And so tools like self-awareness, like breathing, like embodiment, activate this branch of the nervous system, particularly regulation tools, but I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So particularly regulation tools. And basically, the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, so your sympathetic and parasympathetic, you need a healthy interplay between the two, is governed by different areas right through the brain. And Porges coined something called neuroception, where the higher order brain structures, so the ones that are for thinking, reasoning, and planning, so I'm going into the brain, all the structures that are over here, they are constantly scanning your environment for threat or safety so that they can inform your nervous system what it needs to do so that you can flourish. I'm going to touch on it sort of quickly, because if I go into too much detail, it's not quite what I was planning to do in this talk. But there's Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis. That's Charlie, my dog. There's Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis, and this talks to all our positive, our early. I actually want to go back to Porges because I wanted to talk to you about this, because it's part of why relationships are so important. So the first 6 months of an infant's life, an infant learns to regulate themselves. And does everybody know what I mean by regulate? Great. So an infant learns to regulate themselves through ingestive feeding. So that is through either the breast or the bottle. That is how an infant regulates themselves. At 6 months, the dyad, or the primary caregiver relationship, takes over, and the infant learns to regulate themselves by observing the caregiver's eyes, facial gesture, head movement, and vocal tone. If the caregiver is attuned to the infant learns to regulate through this branch of the parasympathetic nervous system that promotes social bonding. If the caregiver is not attuned, the infant learns to regulate through the sympathetic part of the nervous system, which is the stress response, which isn't great. And so already early on, the way that you regulate yourself is formed. And we've got the whole spectrum of parents. We've got, from healthy all the way through to trauma and everything in between. But even in the healthy spectrum, a parent with a newborn is often overwhelmed. They don't know what to do. They're overworked. They're often not attuned. So there's, what's wonderful is we have a lifespan to remedy, and these things can be remedied and really well. So that's the beginning. And then a little area in the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is a little area just over here, encodes all your early positive and negative experiences. And those experiences become what fuel how other areas of the brain interpret what it's seeing outside. So I use a little example of a grade 1 who's on the playground and running around, and then the bell goes and runs through the corridor and slips. And a grade 4 is walking down the corridor. And you can imagine a grade 1 and a grade 4, that's a big deal. And the grade 4 laughs, and the grade 1 gets up and scuttles away. When the grade 1 is in grade 4, that grade 4 is now running around on the playground, and the grade 4 slips, and a grade 8 comes running towards the grade 4 to help. But the grade 4's ventromedial prefrontal cortex quickly sends a message to the insula, who sends a message to the anterior insular cortex. These are other little areas of the brain, and says, get up and skulk away. This is an example of unconscious encoding, of how our experience encode our behavior. This is an entirely different person who's going to act differently, behave differently, but that child's experience was that was it, and it's those really intense experiences, both positive and negative, that encode our behavior. So then there is Bud Craig's neurophysiological trajectory of a feeling, which really in very simple terms looks at how when we have a stimulus from the environment, it's received by our blood flow, our tissues, our fluid. It's received by all the sensory elements in the body. It sends messages up to the spine, and then it enters areas in the brainstem that interpret it based on past sensory encoding, sensory emotional encoding. We've got homeostasis centers in the brainstem. There are 3 little different areas that all have a conversation, make adaptations, and then send it via the thalamus into the higher order brain structures. And again, this process of the different brain areas talking to each other and interpreting happens, and it arrives as a feeling in an area called the insula. So a feeling is actually the sensations in your body arriving as a feeling, but it's gone through a whole lot of process. So you can see where the complexity happens. You can see where the problems happen. The last theorist that underpins my work is Mary Helen Immordina Yang, who does a lot of work around context and self-awareness, and how context informs our self-awareness and informs our perspective lens. So we are social beings, and how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive each other, is based on our really early environment. So a program like this program brings, and there are other awareness-based programs like mindfulness-based programs, they're for different things, but this particular program really brings a consciousness to your emotional triggers, to what's formed them, to how they've got patterned in your nervous system, and then to how to regulate them. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the fabulous outcomes, and particularly what I've discovered is the essential, critical, pivotal role of self-awareness in shifting relationships into healthier spaces. So self-awareness gives rise to self-understanding. So that exercise with different parts of self gives rise to a real deep self-understanding that moves into self-acceptance, that moves into self-worth, that moves into self-kindness, that moves into self-care, that moves into emotion regulation, and that moves into empowerment. Just this particular process. So, for example, there's a participant who is a woman in her 30s who has struggled with bulimia, who is really, really disciplined. She will wake at 5, she will do journaling, she will do yoga, then she will go to work. She's really rigorous. And she discovered one of her characters, and I'm changing all the names, was Walter. Walter was fat and a slob and disgusting and sat on the couch and ate hot chips, and she was repulsed by him. She didn't understand what he was doing in her repertoire of selves, of parts of self. She's like, this doesn't belong to me. So I suggested she spend some time with him. She came back and she said, you know, I need to sleep more. I am exhausted, and Walter is teaching me how to indulge slightly. So she woke up at 6 rather than 5, and she slept from 5 to 6. That hour of sleep, she also began to take naps in her day, short naps in her day. That sleep shifted the quality of her energy, shifted how she began to feel about herself, shifted her self-care. As she went further into the process with the early caregivers, she had a dad who emerged from the military, so he was very strict. And she had other members of her family who could just go, didn't need as much sleep. So she was comparing her own productivity to their productivity. This relaxing began to allow her to start to enjoy other spaces. This particular woman is quite naturally introverted. She began to date somebody through the program. She began to reach out. She was feeling nourished. She was feeling refreshed. The participant in her 50s who one of her parts of self was she named mute. And she discovered that she would, in certain situations in her work life and in her home life, she would become mute. She would become voiceless. And so just her understanding what that looked like for her, what that felt like for her, down-regulated the threat. So when she found herself, I'm going into mute, she used the golden nugget and she began to use her voice. In the trajectory of this, she resigned from her job where she was really being treated awfully. They actually promoted her and offered her another job within the company. But what also happened out of that, because neurologically, the areas that develop with self-awareness overlap with the areas that develop with empathy. She began to look at self-accountability in that she needed to articulate and communicate. Otherwise, she wasn't going to be heard or treated well in a particular. She had a particular colleague who spoke to her in a way that she found meaning. So she started to communicate differently, and that dynamic started to shift. Self-worth started to emerge. There were, I'm also going to merge participants. There were participants who were overly, so parts of themselves. Now, what's really interesting is to find the part, we found a duality within positive and negative parts of self. So first of all, in people being able to look at parts of themselves that they don't like and actually put it out there and actually engage with it and understand what that part is serving. So mute was keeping her safe. She felt unsafe. She was scared. But it was no longer serving her. But in looking at it, it wasn't so bad. She could then start to accept it. There was one man in his 50s who had a terrible temper. It was the reason he came on the course. He was horrified by his temper. Beautiful, gentle, lovely human being. But he had this temper. And so in creating a character for the temper, in creating Bill, his character for the temper, he could understand when this character emerged, what overwhelmed this character, and more importantly, what this character needed so that it felt nourished and could quieten down. This particular character needed alone time and it needed sleep. Prior to the program, when the man lost his temper, it would be 2 or 3 days where he would be out of action because there was such a sense of self-betrayal, such a sense of shame. Through the program, when he lost his temper, it wasn't as bad. He could snip it in the bud much quicker. And it would be 2 or 3 hours before he recovered. He also learned to repair. But understanding the genesis of the character and what's happening and what the character needs and articulating that to his spouse completely down-regulated the threat of the character. So these negative parts of self start to become far less threatening when we can look at them. There were quite a couple of people who were, the positive part of themselves was that they were very caring, only to discover that they were over-caring and that there was a lot of self-neglect. And in this over-caring, they were disempowering their children. And so they went through a process and it was really challenging for them. But in learning to self-care with intention and with boundaries, so to give themselves time and space to do things that they needed to do, to put boundaries where their children where they would do things for their children that really they shouldn't be doing. And as parents, we all do that. For those of us that are parents, it's like an instinct. But they would pull back and there'd be a little bit of resistance, and suddenly there was enabling. The children started doing things for themselves. There was a sense of empowerment. There was a better relating. much more gentle examples is a woman who grew up in a really liberal home. And so when she was doing the exercise around the biography worksheet, she was really looking at you know, the perspective lens she grew up with. It was always empathy for others. So with her daughter, and she had a part of self which she called the prickly pear. She was a little bit prickly, a little bit defensive. But with her daughter would come to her with something, and she would take the perspective of the other person because she was primed that way. You know, it was always look at the context, you know, always look at both sides. What her daughter needed was to be seen and acknowledged and heard. And so she began to do that for her daughter. She also, I can't remember now what got rid of the prickles. I think it was the knowledge of the prickles, her really observing it and using the golden nugget and allowing. So what emerged was a kind of non-judgmentalness and a tolerance, allowing people to be themselves by allowing yourself to be yourself. So as the person became more authentic, they also allowed the other person to be more authentic. I just want to see that I give you some really nice other meaty examples. Yeah, beautiful participant who in her characters discovered that she just didn't feel enough. What did she need? She needed self-care, was a huge thing for her. She needed self-acceptance, and she needed to give it to herself. When she gave it to herself, she suddenly had more capacity, and she was able to be more present for her husband, and particularly, and more present for her daughters. And as she had a very difficult boss that she struggled with, but as she began to accept herself and just feel good enough, she also, and feels sort of more regulated and safer, she began to, especially doing the golden nugget, she began to observe that the boss was stressed. They were never going to get on well, but she wasn't going to add to this woman's stress. They had to work together. So her communication changed. She was able to communicate firmly and to the point, but she was also able to have boundaries, and she didn't get locked into the dread of working with this woman, or indeed she was able to see this woman's got things going on. She's stressed. So a kind of seeing that there's somebody else is going through something. There's a lovely thing that people learn around co-regulation. So if you are triggered, the other person is triggered, becomes triggered. So when you're triggered, the person, say you're dealing with your spouse, your partner, or your child, or your parent, choose one in your brain, in your head, for yourself. And you, or indeed a friend, a good friend, you triggered, you'll suddenly observe that they triggered, or if they triggered, you'll become triggered. If there's no self-awareness of, okay, I'm triggered here, and this is about my stuff, let me regulate first before I speak. Or the other person's triggered, let me not take that on. That's their stuff. Let me do my breathing, let me stay in balance, let me see what's going. So you can co-regulate each other, and you can co-trigger each other. So when I'm working with couples, it's very interesting to observe them have a conversation when one feels triggered because the other one gets triggered, and then the other one's triggered, and then they're just triggered, and it goes like this. Or when the one regulates, the other suddenly goes and regulates. And the tone of voice, the eloquence completely changes, and the listening completely changes. The actual way you listen, you're able to listen compassionately, and you're able to be far more eloquent when you're feeling regulated. So we've found improved connection, better engagement with family members, improved communication, improved perspective taking is really big. So improved self-compassion, improved empathy, improved non-judgment and tolerance. And then changing the script. So people really behaving differently. And so the other person starts to behave differently. So those are some of the delicious outcomes. And now I'm thinking that we should open the floor and just have a conversation.
That sounds great. I love the case studies. It just, it makes it so tangible for all of us, to really, because I think all of us can relate to probably every single character that came up. There's a little part of ourselves
that's a really beautiful thing that you're saying, Elaine, because I just want to pick up on that, because particularly when one does group work, people are astounded at how they see themselves in everybody. And that what I really particularly like is when I've got a really mixed group of people from different environments who do different things, and they think, and there's a real shared vulnerability and a real common humanity. And it's really heartening to see, because we're all made of the same stuff, so we all struggle with the same stuff, just in different environments and in different ways.
Absolutely.
Pam, have you got your hand up? No, there's a hand on your thing. Oh, it's my hand. Okay, go for it, Elaine. Sorry.
What I was also going to say is one of the things that I think comes up a lot, and it certainly did for me before I went through my sort of health journeys. And that's why the sharing in a group dynamic I'm really drawn to, because I feel like one of the things that came up a lot was this, and when I work with people myself, is this feeling of being alone. So sharing the stories,
Absolutely.
sharing the characters.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, one of the outcomes that was from isolation to social connection. Yes. So people started moving out of their, particularly introverts who are not naturally, who can spend so much more time at home. And I did this through COVID, started to reach out, started to connect out. And, that shared experience, and to listen to other people's vulnerability and know you're not alone, what that does for regulation is enormous. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. I feel very excited about the idea of doing sort of this kind of program. I would love it in a group, within a group dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think it's quite fascinating to look at, and to be brave enough to look at where we are, not as individuals only anymore. I think it's so important that we understand that we affect each other, whether we even know it or not. How many times, like, little things I think of, like, get into your car first thing in the morning and someone's driving like a twit, and that can affect your mood. And why have you let it affect your mood? Or, you go into the grocery store and the teller's just so lovely and smiley, and like your mood's changed, or you have a good class, or, how we get so affected. It's definitely about like the connection, which is what you do, but the coming together. It's sort of, maybe we bringing together again, we re-knitting ourselves back together again, because that isolation that separated us so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's also lovely when you do this work a lot. You can just, that getting irritated with the person in the car, which we all know, just talk so much about what's going on in you. You can just, you leave the house, you are, it's got, there are days where you are irritated and so it's hoot, or you're impatient, and there are days where you're feeling good, so it's like, let the person drive a little bit slower. But just that observation of what's going on in you.
Absolutely, because that can set a tone for the whole day. If you don't pay attention.
Absolutely. And if you're not paying attention to what's going on inside you, and you are dealing with a whole lot of stuff, it often does come out either on the road or at the store person or at some stranger. Like we will be part of or observe kind of incongruous rage. And it's got nothing to do with the other person. You don't know the other person. It's got to do with what's going on inside you. So there's something very liberating in learning how to tune in. And what I've discovered through my individual work, because when you're in a group, you as a facilitator, you move a whole group and you're holding everybody, but everybody's got courage from everybody else. So people are quite scared of that first exercise, and when we share parts of self, the first one to share a negative, and then suddenly it's like, but it's so easy, because it's like, oh my goodness, if that person, I would have never thought, well, I'm going to share too. But when I have individual clients, it's not easy for people to look inside, especially at the parts they don't like or don't understand. I've got to go much slower. And it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to sit with those parts, to externalize them. It brings so much relief when people externalize them, because they get all this information and then everything sort of settles and it goes into a kind of cohesive, it integrates. So with the self-insight, for some people, they stay on the level of self-insight. For others, they move into integration. But it's a process with different people. But it's challenging. I've really learned that it is challenging for people to be self-aware. You need a lot of courage.
Yeah, I think that's a great word. You really need courage to go deep, to have a look inside, to open up that closet and just see what's in there and be prepared to share it. It was definitely the word that came up for me the most, journeying through sort of close to 2 years of a health journey. I knew that word would carry me. That embodying courage was what I had to do, was my boat that helped me sail through. So I want to see, is anybody else, I know I can see you all sitting here and you're all attentive. Is there anybody that wants to open up and ask Ruth any questions or make a comment while you're here? I'm just going to look around the room, see who's everybody. You're all shy tonight. Yes, Pam.
But I don't know if Ruth actually wants questions, because not because Ruth wouldn't want questions, but when you're happier that everyone stays quiet rather than asking questions.
I'm very happy for questions.
Okay. I'm just curious about working through the process, and then obviously having the skill of the nugget that you can self-regulate. So you get into a triggered situation, and at one point you said, then you're in a better position to have really difficult conversations with potentially challenging people, but with a lot more compassion. But I'm really curious about the dynamic if the person you're speaking to has not done any work and is not regulated, especially if they're a particularly defensive or aggressive or volatile kind of person. And I'm thinking particularly in like a professional situation, not a personal one, like how that plays out. Because I kind of feel like for me, I can regulate, well, sometimes, but hypothetically, I can regulate into be in this really good space, and but if the other person is hectic, it's really hard to feel like you're getting anywhere with that. Or I feel like I've missed something in my understanding of how that would work.
I think that's a great question, a hard question. So Pam, so what one learns, what one can only do is work with oneself. One can only improve oneself, understand oneself, so that one can regulate oneself. If one is with somebody, first of all, the regulation has to be practiced over time, so that when you find yourself in a situation with this difficult colleague, for example, if it's a difficult colleague, which I'm assuming if it's professional, if you are regulated, if you are genuinely feeling safe, your approach to the person will shift. You will start to, if somebody is just outrageous, which is what you're describing, and they're not doing any work, you will start to be able to place better boundaries. And over time, the person has to start responding to that. So they may not want to do their work, but energetically they're going to feel it because you're not responding in the same way. So you will just start to place better boundaries. You will start to speak in a different way, and you will tolerate less of. And there are many instances where somebody else doesn't want to do their work. You know, and it's painful, but one does one's own work, and then one just starts to engage with it differently. And also, one does one of two things. One engages differently, and over time that shifts, or one just decides one's no longer going to engage. Or one understands this person has limitations, I will engage, this is as much as I'm going to do. And it doesn't, you're able to see this. I think that's what also happens, is you're able to see this is that person's stuff. It's got nothing to do with me, because what we do tend to do, if we are people that do the work and we're coming up against somebody that refuses to do the work, is we do the work for them. And we start to go, well, what's my part in this? And da-da-da-da. Nah. If you are with somebody that's not doing the work, you do your work, you have the appropriate boundaries. And I think it really builds those boundaries. And that's not an easy thing to do. So it doesn't become comfortable, but you understand it and you know exactly how you're going to work within it.
I love that.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. That's really helpful perspective. Are you going to teach us the nugget tonight?
Yeah,
I need like a nugget crash course. Anybody else? Nugget crash course?
So I want to teach the golden nugget. Lovely, I'm excited. Let me do that. But before I do that, I just want to tell you about this exercise. It's a wonderful exercise that you will get better at over time. So when I run my groups, and I ran for my PhD study, I ran 7 groups of the whole program. And then I ran 3 groups where I only did the golden nugget, because we need to see where the impact of the program lies. Maybe it only lies in the golden nugget, although we've seen it doesn't. But and it takes people between 4 to 6 weeks to actually get it. If you've never done any breathing, if you've done breathing, it's going to be much easier for you. But if you are not used to breathing in your core area, which I'm going to show you now, and in listening into that area and embodying that area, it can take between 4 to 6 weeks. And the purpose of this exercise, it was designed to be relational. So it is designed that you listen into your nervous system in a given moment. So, and you'll see when we do the exercise, so that you can know how you're feeling in a given moment, so it can prepare you for what you're going into. So if you are feeling scratchy, you need to know it's not the time to go and talk to the person that you already feel scratchy with. Or, you know, if you're feeling like you can feel the depletion, you need to know that your capacity is going to be less. If that you'll feel when there's expansion, you'll feel when there's openness. And so it just gives you insight into how you're feeling, and then an ability to nourish that area and regulate that area. So let's do it. I need you to see my whole body. And can you still hear me? You can hear me. Okay, I'm actually just going to come. So can I ask you all please to stand up? You're able. I'm going to walk back so that you can see my feet, and then I'm going to come back and walk forward, and I'm going to guide you through this. Okay. So placing your feet together, seeing that your big toes are in alignment, so that your spine is in alignment. Opening your feet to a wide first, and opening your heels out so that your feet are underneath your knees, are underneath your hips, are underneath your shoulders, and your neck is loose. I'm just aware that some of you, okay, that's fine, you want to write, so that your neck is loose. Taking 3 deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth, bringing yourself into your body and into the room that you're in. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Opening your eyes. Taking your forefingers, placing them just below your navel. Where your baby finger is, pressing it in, and then cupping the palm of your hand over that area. So that is what I call the womb area, both in women and in men. So it's forefingers just below your navel where your baby finger is, pressing it in and cupping the palm over your hand. And you can apply a little bit of soft pressure just to awaken that area. Closing your eyes and placing your mind's eye into that area, you're gently going to start to awaken that area with breath. So you're going to gently start to breathe into that area. Here we're breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. And as you fill that area with breath, I want you to observe the sensations in that area. Are they hesitant? Resistant? Achy? Tight? Sluggish? Pricking? Jabbing? Are they soft? Open? Expansive? Yielding? And there'll be a myriad of words or images that might come to mind to describe how you're feeling in that area in this moment in time. And I want you to allow a color to come. If a color comes, I want you to fill that area with the color and the breath. If no color comes, that's fine. You just keep working with the breath. And release, just keeping your gaze down so you can observe how you're feeling, your body's feeling in this moment. And then when you're ready, coming back to sitting. Just give yourself a moment. How was that? Difficult? Not difficult. It can be quite difficult to do it first if you're not used to breathing in that area. And if you really do struggle to breathe in that area, then I tend to ask people to do it lying on the floor, but then their knees are up. So their feet are on the floor, their knees are up, and you would do the same thing, placing toes together, seeing big toes on alignment opening so that you're in alignment. Because then you have the support of the floor, so that you can drop down into that area. And then when you feel you've got it, you can gradually come up to standing. You can also do it sitting, but then you need to be away from the chair. So that I do it standing because it's whole body, whole mind engagement. Any feedback? What's it like? Any questions?
Anyone? I'll go first. Really interesting. I mean, as most of you know, I teach yoga, so I do a lot of breathing, but I am often in the position of a teacher facilitator as opposed to an attendee being guided. So that's always a different experience for me. Because I can shift into that mode very quickly when I'm in the teaching and lecturing and facilitating role, when I'm in the relaxed one and it's reversed. So it was quite interesting. I felt, it was, you said, you know, pick a word, and I felt very calm and very comfortable, but then there was also the word that came up was tight.
So you could feel, yeah. It's great. And all it does is it gives you insight into how your nervous system's feeling in a given moment. It's all it is. It's information. So that, you know, if you're going to see your mother and it's challenging, if you're feeling like tight and it's not the time, you know, postpone it for the next day when you're feeling a little bit more expansive, because it talks to your capacity. It talks to your capacity. I had long COVID for 4 months earlier this year, and COVID impacts the vagus inflammation, and I couldn't activate that area. And I mean, I've been doing this exercise since 2000, so it's a long time, and I just couldn't activate that area. And eventually when I did, it was sluggish and I was tired, and it was really interesting. And my engagements that were challenging for me during that time, that I naturally find challenging and I have to work at continually, I really struggled because I didn't have capacity. So it was very useful to listen in and to go, you've just got to know that's where you're at. That's what's happening.
Pam.
Is the logic, I don't know if logic is the right word, but I'm looking at it quite kind of academically. Is the logic with the capacity, that the more you listen to your capacity and not just like throw yourself into like, but I've got to, like, I must keep going, I must do all the things, that your capacity grows because you're actually listening to yourself and holding back? Because I kind of listen to that and I think like, oh my God, like, I love the Nugget. I'd never have to leave the house and could just stay home. And like, you know, I mean, that is very appealing to me, even though I do all the things and go into the world. And lots of them are really wonderful things, even though I don't really have capacity for them, if I'm honest. So it's not hard to key into that. So that's a kind of like, one question is academic. So that sort of, is that the logic of how it works? And then I've got another question, but let's focus on that one first.
So absolutely. So the logic is that you listen in. First of all, the breath and the color activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So you're listening and you're activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which is replenishing. So the logic is absolutely that you attune to how you are actually feeling inside, and you nourish. And if you are feeling, for example, that it's depleted, you choose to rest rather than, you know, or you listen to, you will then also start to feel, oh, it's not the time to go and do that. Actually, I need to sit out.
And you would change colors like every day when you do.
So the color is, the color has no meaning. There's not connected to chakras or anything else. It is a vibrational frequency that your nervous system will show up to you, and it gives your nervous system the vibrational frequency it needs to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So often a color will come and it's like I don't like that color. You know, what is that? But it is nourishing. And some people won't have color for quite a long time and then will eventually get color, particularly if they're very here and are not used to connecting.
And then my other question is more like, not so much a like logic question. It's like how that was for me, is that I, in any kind of, so the Nugget, and then like meditations that are more like qigong, loving kindness kind of meditations, like anytime there's like, as soon as you're like, cup your hand on your tummy, I was like, oh God, like it's never like, and it's not a body image thing. It's like, whatever, my tummy's my tummy, but it's like, it's so resistant. It's like, there's something like about that area that's like, ah, like, don't make me do that. It's so strange.
No, it's not strange, Pam. It's actually quite common. It's quite common. It's a very vulnerable area. It's the womb. So it's a very, in men and women and men, it's a very, very vulnerable area. And some people, it takes them a long time before they will feel comfortable embodying that area. And it's your power point. It is really where you will harness a groundedness and a power and a sense of calm and a sense of safety, but it's a deep embodiment. It's a deep embodiment. It's really sitting inside the body. And so it's very common that people struggle with that area. And actually, if I had one woman have a hysterectomy in the program, or just before the program, and so obviously she couldn't, it was just too painful. So I actually got her to breathe here, and that really worked. So I would encourage you here, but if it's too difficult, you can go here until you are ready to go here. Yeah, and also that's a beautiful observation. Like, that's part of the information, and the information you can approach really academically. Oh, okay, that's how it is. That's really difficult. Let me watch it unfold over time. What I like about this exercise is you really need to practice it for 1 to 4 minutes. It's not a long exercise, and just that regulation will starts to just shift the curve.
I love that. Can I add something to that? I mean, it's just my sort of, what is it? Observation, combination of having studied various modalities and teaching the yoga. But for me, this area is very important. It's sacred. It's from your navel down and it's also where the whole pelvic girdle, that whole area, that sacred bowl, I feel like it is, because that's the entry point that all of us arrived into this world. And because we arrived through that point in the body, we are creative beings. And so reconnecting with our creativity, recreating with our sacredness, maybe just playing with that idea, Pam, as opposed to a resistance, kind of like maybe, turning it around at some point, because you do enjoy the golden nugget, to kind of go, this is actually my sacred safe place of nurturing and deep kindness of spirit and soul. To me, it's a very important area to honor. So
lovely.
So, who else had an experience with the golden nugget that somebody wants to share, or any thoughts?
Well,
Michael.
I'll share. No, I found that very relaxing, and of the descriptions that I didn't feel anything. I felt more, relaxed and sort of rich in that area, breathing, and then I did have the color green, and then I just filled my eyes with green, and And it was very relaxing. You know, it was a short period, and I could imagine if you did that for 4 minutes, you know, in the morning, say, before you start your day,
Yeah,
that would actually help you be very grounded for the day.
absolutely. 100%. And it really does. And people that manage to do it in the first part of their day start to see the relational changes and the tone of change, the tone change of their day, because they're grounded.
Yeah, and this is what, you know, what I admire about your work there is that a lot of this, you know, as you know, these things develop from childhood, and habits and whatever of relationships go into adulthood, that I would say most of the time they're never addressed. And by doing this is sort of bringing back the awareness of it, so that when you're in a situation or something, that you're able to recognize uh, some, you know, that situation, how you're feeling, how they're, uh, you know, the emotions that are going on, and uh, and then not let something escalate or create something that really has nothing to do with any, you know, nothing to do with you or with them, whatever, projecting onto you, you know, it just would
Mm.
alleviate a whole lot of just wasted time, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. In a nutshell, very well summed up. But it's hard work. It
It
takes
is, but I
hard work,
see
and
that.
it's continual practice.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's
yes,
continual practice.
it would be. I would say, you
Yeah.
know, because you go through, you know, how many people do you meet? You meet thousands of people, and you're you know, so many different personalities and situations and things like this, and then it'll always depends on your emotional state. You
Yeah.
know, what emotional state are you in? Where yesterday you could have reacted differently than you're today and tomorrow.
Yeah,
So you
absolutely.
have to be constantly aware of that, and this is why I think that golden nugget is a good thing, just to sort of set you up for the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
Pam, that was a really good question. That first question you said, that was like the flip side of the coin. Because yeah, you know, if you have two people in a relationship that want to work on stuff, and okay, but then if you're, you know, a coworker, whatever relationship, you're here and that person isn't working, well, exactly.
Exactly.
What are you going to do then? Then you have to go to yourself, and you have to, like, all right, this is this is
Wonderful psychologist. I'm sure some of you have heard of her, Harriet Lerner. Is it Harriet Lerner? The dance of anger. She's done the dance of anger, the dance of intimacy, the dance of deception. But she talks to that point, you know, that when you change your dance, the other person eventually has to change theirs. And this is just a vehicle to help you change your dance, because when one changes one's way of engagement, one needs a support tool, because one feels very shaky, and it helps you endure the discomfort. It's also about enduring discomfort in difficult engagements.
I think what's really interesting about it's a bit of like self-disclosure here, but what Michael just said is, you know, when you go up against a person who isn't doing the work and you're just left with yourself, for me it's been really interesting in this dynamic, because then I am just left with myself, and I like fixing and I like everyone to be okay, and then it's like, what? And it completely throws me, even though I'm like, this is not my stuff. But
Yeah.
the relational dynamic, because then I can't fix it because this person is like unplayable, and then I'm just left with myself, becomes this really like tumultuous thing for me, because it's actually much easier for me to fix everyone else than to have to like look at myself.
Yeah,
that's where the boundaries come in.
Yeah, that's the boundaries. And you know, Pam, it's really like a common, you're in a lot of good company where that emerges with people that, you know, and what one of the outcomes that started to happen is not trying to fix, literally, not meddling. There was one participant who has the same go-to as you, And because she could see that side of herself, and she like viscerally sat with it, something happened and she was about to start doing her fixing. And she just went, you know what, I'm not going to fix. I'm going to step back. This is not my stuff. And it fixed itself. It fixed itself, or whatever it did played out, but she could step out of it. It wasn't her stuff. So that thing where you left with yourself, it's also just sort of recognizing it's not your role to fix. You know, if that person's going to destroy wherever she goes, she or he is going to destroy wherever they go. And
I guess it's also that capacity, like you say with the Nugget, like you build more capacity, then you don't just jump into like fixing and rescuing. You're like, okay, this is not my stuff. Like you go do you.
Exactly. And that'll be really uncomfortable for you if your go-to is to fix. So then it's really good to cognitively go, I'm going to endure this discomfort. I'm uncomfortable when I'm trying to, this is healthy. This is a healthy discomfort. Like you will just feel wrong because your whole body wants to go and fix. But after the 5th or 10th time, maybe the 10th time, you will start to go, oh, it'll just, it starts to like just, it's like exposure therapy. It starts to just downgrade.
It's almost like retraining that little habit of wanting to fix, and then it just becomes lesser and lesser, like an addiction, because less of an addiction, and then it doesn't even become an occurrence. Then you're like, you just recognize it right away, and it's like, okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you fire to wire. That's Daniel Siegel's phrase, where you know, when you're patterned, your neurons are patterned and connecting and all different connections. But if you stop a behavior and you start, well, let's say you start a new behavior, so you don't go towards the fixing. You'll have to do a lot of repetition of it, but it fires to wire over time a new neural connection. That's when it will become comfortable, but that takes time. So we can actually forge new pathways.
Rewire.
As you say, rewire, absolutely.
But it's a great sharing, Pam, because there was, you know, I relate to a lot of it. It's something that I myself, it was a go-to for many years. And I can't say I've mastered it, but I've become a lot more aware. And there's certain individuals where that's what I would do. Some colleagues, some, you know, work colleagues, some family. What I did notice is as I started practicing my boundaries and stop being the fixer, because, you know, my nature is to teach, I really have to reel it in because it's like the thing I love doing. So, but I had to recognize how much energy I was giving away. And so when you can just stop that motion in the discomfort, as Ruth said, but I did start getting more energy back if I could just like stop, distract myself enough to go and do something good for me, you know, even if it's standing upside down, but, you know, stop giving that energy away. That was what was depleting me a lot of the time.
Yeah, that was you were creating a whole new situation for yourself by giving away your energy. You know, and I think it's so this awareness is really good. And the thing you had, you know, in the beginning, I guess your week 1, when you're creating these figures, or someone, you know, would create these characters of different you know, emotions, I guess. Or
week 2.
Is that week 2?
Yeah.
But I think that's really good, and it's it's something that since it's within you, it would be difficult to see that makes it tangible, that
Yeah.
you can really just
Exactly.
look at yourself right in front of you,
Exactly.
and recognize those behaviors as, oh, there's that one again.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
And it becomes less scary, less threatening.
Yeah.
And there's also something very powerful. The whole exercise takes about an hour. And so you sit with these aspects of self for quite a long time because you're making them. And as you make them, you are quietly processing. I mean, it's a privilege to watch people. They're silent, but what you see on the face, as the person is sitting with that, it's like a whole processing that happens, so that when you've got the character, it's quite alchemical what happens. But it very much is that it's outside of yourself,
and they're putting it out there.
Yeah, and then you can also see it's just a part of yourself.
Yeah.
It's not the whole thing, so you can also observe. It's also interesting, Pam, which is a new layer of learning for me in my own life as I continue to do this work, is seeing people that you struggle with. It's just one part of them, and that they've got these other parts, and it's quite, especially if it's somebody you struggle with, it's quite interesting, because it also that's where the shifting of your own boundaries helps. Because if you shift your own behavior, you stop engaging with that part of that person. So it's also sort of just, everybody's got these different parts. And yeah.
I love this. It's such amazing work, Ruth. I'm sitting here busy thinking about the various therapies that I chose to do when I went through my chemo, and one was psychotherapy, which was sort of a very, it's obviously its origins are, come from a lot of what you're doing, but it was a couple of sessions, very powerful. But I just think about pleasure, Laura. So nice that you joined. I to really have delved deeper and do a course like yours, if I had known about it back then, really could have really helped understand those characters, because there was so much, part of going through any disease, no matter what it is. Thank you, Mara. Leka.
Thank you, Mara. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. There was so much healing that was needed with some of the people, and that process I then sort of just had to journey alone a few years after that. But this your course that you've put together, I love how you've put it together. I love the characters. I think it's one of those things, that a course that could be used so far afield, within school systems, within syllabi, within psychology. Psychology students should learn this. Schools and learners should learn this. We're in a state where we really need to have healthier society from what we've come through, and our connections and relationships are going to be the healing of how we can move forward in this world.
Thank you. That's lovely.
So thank you. So
from your lips to God's ears.
Yeah. yeah, can help. I just think like if we could do these things. Pleasure, Lucy. I'm so pleased you
Lucy.
joined. So I know everybody, it's getting a little bit late. So I just want to say such a big thank you to Ruth for joining again. This was absolute gold.
Oh, thank you. It's been so lovely. And it's
Oh,
really, I mean, my favorite, of course, is the engaging and just hearing the response. That's just lovely. And hearing the thoughts and the things that come up for you is really lovely.
oh, my
Thank
pleasure,
you.
sir. Thank you, Ruth. And please know you're welcome in the kitchen anytime. So maybe next year, come back again.
Lovely.
Let's do it maybe again. I just think there's so much value to it. I want more people to hear this. So to all of you, Pam, so wonderful to meet you. Jane, so amazing to see you
Thank you,
again.
Jane.
Louise and Helga. Mikey, thank you for being part of it and recording as always. And I will see you all in a month on the 6th of October. So
Brilliant. And thanks for the brilliant questions. Thanks, everybody.
pleasure. Lots and lots of love. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.